Well, we talked about next on the mic, my man Mike. Well, it's not Mick Meltzer, it's Bryan Smeltzer. The rhymes are Daryl and the burgers are Meltzer. Here we go.
Hey,
BryanSmeltzer.com. I love anything with Meltzer.
Back.
Yes, you are. So good.
Great to be back.
Whenever I see Bryan, I think of the story when I was training a kid named Andy Schmidt, and I went to a law office and they said, Meltzer. I said, yeah, it's like seltzer with an M. And and then the kid says, this is his very first day. He said, what's your name? He said, I'm Andy Schmidt. You know, like shit with an M. And now I got the Smeltzer is like seltzer. It's truly seltzer with an M. President of LiquidMind. Your new book is out. I had to have you back on. The Visionary Brand, Success Formula Behind the World's Most Visionary Brands. And I want to start there with the idea of a visionary brand, because I think it does take a subtle perspective to understand, you know, building a brand or building a visionary brand. What's the distinction between the normal brand that we may build comparatively to a visionary brand?
Well, I think a lot of it. Thanks again, David, for having me on. Hey, Mike and Mike. How you doing?
There you go.
Hey, good to see you.
Meltzer and Meltzer, Mike and Mike.
Well, I think, you know, kind of carrying on our last conversation, David, for me, you know, kind of the passion behind writing this book was what I found, actually enough, was there's a lot of brands that are close to being visionary. You know, you think of the Apples of the world, but there's always a piece of that formula that's missing. And I kind of chose the title by design. And you could have very easily said a visionary brand, but I said the visionary brand. What does that look like? And there's these formula or pieces of that puzzle that are made up to become a visionary brand. Because a lot of times I get brands that will come to me and say, what do I need to do to set a vision? You know, that's kind of that first question, right? Well, setting the vision. Well, there's a lot of pieces to that vision. People think, well, a great product, hey, I'll just invent the next iPod and I'll be successful. Well, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, and you're mentioning about what it takes to be visionary. It's great product, it's innovation, it's that visionary at the top that actually can see the future and then realize that future through others. And that's a key piece, because, you know, you're only as good as your ability to perform, and without resources or people that are going to execute your vision, you're never going to realize it. So people got to understand there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, and being the visionary brand, everybody missing a piece. There's some that miss more than others. Apple's very close, but even Apple has weaknesses to being a visionary brand.
Yeah,
Bryan, I think it's Smarter, Faster, Stronger is a great book, and what he talks about is you never want to be first to the market. You want to be somewhere in the middle, and you never want to be last. So when he talked about Apple, the iPod, there was the MP3 player first. And then Steve Jobs was smart enough, a visionary and stuff, I'll put 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? So he did it. Facebook wasn't the first. There was MySpace. Do you find with a lot of visionary brands in your research, in this book, it was great, it broke down that you never have to be first to the market, but you've got to be an innovative to know where you fit in that marketplace, because people buy what's familiar. They like familiarity, right? So you started a startup, right? Yeah. But you weren't new to the startup business. You were new to the startup business, but you were successful. But you had to have known what a startup was, even though you hadn't started one. Do you know what I mean? So can you go? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So there's got to be a juggle there, correct?
Yeah, there's kind of the context of that question, Mike. What I look at and I talk about with the brands I've been with, and then inside the book, the Visionary Brand, is what I call imitators versus invaders. Nothing wrong with being an imitator, but you're not an innovator. So a great story behind that is Skechers. Skechers knows who they are, and they're very successful at it, but they're not necessarily innovators. They're late adopters to a product that was innovative. So look at these things that these great brands have created. And I'll go back to Steve with the creation of the iPod. And it's a great example that I have in the book, actually, as a case study. And Steve didn't actually invent the iPod just to have to be a standalone product. That was Walkman. And Walkman was a great product innovative at the time, but then didn't incrementally improve it. You know, they sold, I don't know, 200 million of them over 20 years, and then they went away. So, but Steve's idea was to disrupt an industry. It wasn't to create a great product. It was to disrupt the music industry. He knew in the back of his mind what the iPod was going to do. And look where it is today. And that's really what this ecosystem of Apple was built around. The foundation of it was a innovative product that disrupted an industry.
Brilliant.
Bryan, I think that a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, business owners, creators, they have this idea of a vision, right? This thing that they want to go build, create. And in some period of time on the timeline of moving towards that vision, they get stuck, they get lost, they get corrupted, they get confused, they disappear, they forget why they're doing it. How in the world do you maintain and sustain your vision for long-term growth? Like, how do you do that?
Well, the first thing I look at, Michael, is I look at with this innovation pipeline, and I call it actually surfing this pipeline, is that if you can create an innovative product, you look at the supply and demand curve, right? It's this, being able to, and I use Apple as an example, Mike, because we're talking about it. The sustaining this generational brands, I call it in the book, those that are not one-hit wonders, have been able to magically build product on the early adopter end of the supply and demand curve. And they've been able to surf it all the way to the back end through generational or incremental improvements. Nobody needs an iPhone 14. I'm fine with a 12, but for whatever reason, Apple's been able to create this ecosystem that everybody wants the latest and greatest. And you're talking about how do you stay and sustain generational brands? Nike's been able to do it. And they do it through also being able to build communities and what I call loyalty around the brand and the lifestyle that people adopt as a result of wearing their product. And I use a quote in the book, which I still to this day think is one of the greatest quotes ever, was from Ralph Lauren, where he said, "We're not selling a product, we're selling a lifestyle." And everybody's got a polo, but Ralph magically created this lifestyle. And that's really what I found, Michael, is that surfing this innovation pipeline, Apple's been able to do it. Nike, Ralph Lauren have built this lifestyle. Patagonia is another great example of, they're not the best products in the industry. North Face makes probably better products, but it's just something that they've created with their community that allows them to be better mountain climbers. Run brands allow them to be better runners. Whatever it may be, they provide value beyond product. And that's what allows them to be generational through loyalty in their community build.
Yeah.
You know, Bryan, I ran in '99 Samsung's first, it was called Convergence Device Division. And later on, they named them smartphones. It was a Windows CE device working with Googs and others at Microsoft as they were trying to disrupt a market of transcoding XML onto WAP phones. And how do we utilize a Windows browser on a telephone? And obviously with bandwidth and battery life being two of the inhibiting factors of that type of innovation. And, you know, Microsoft weren't able to sustain the wave from early adopters. And yet Sony wasn't able to sustain the wave. There is a lesson through that unbelievable experience of being able to meet someone you and I both know, Dr. Jacobs, and Paul and Jeff were working on the phone with me as well. And of course, we used the CDMA dual mode chip at the time. And I was blessed to, get mentorship from Dr. Jacobs. And he said something really interesting that had great vision to it. And you keep talking about community. We were looking at this, what he had shelved IP. And, Qualcomm owned all these great things that, they didn't bring to market or they purchased so it would never reach the market. It was really cool to look at. And he said, "Dave, what business am I in?" I said, "You're in the chip business." Without blinking, I said, "You're in the chip business." He said, "No, I'm in the owning the customer business." And, back in 1999, owning the customer didn't have the size, scope, and scale that Patagonia, Nike, other brands have the benefit of, including individual brands like Mike Diamond, Michael Unbroken, Dave Meltzer, and Bryan Smeltzer, that we can actually have millions of people in our community. Can we have billions? Probably not. But, you know, for an individual brand, millions of people that you own as a customer are part of that community. How important is it to not just have a community, but actually own your community? Meaning Qualcomm could sell insurance, they could, you know, do whatever they want and distribute it through that community. And now the community is 7.6 billion possible at a very inexpensive rate. How important is it to own the customer?
Well, that's a great question and a great analogy. We're taken back a few years there, David.
Sorry,
right?
I'm old.
Yeah. So this idea of community is really interesting because you know, I use the one word that I think carries across all brands is authentic, and being able to be authentic with your customer builds loyalty. And what I mean by that is whether you're a service company, a product company, what do you do? That's a great question, David. And it can be answered both ways. You know, you'll ask an ops person, you know, what do you do? Well, I'm in ops. Well, you're also in customer service. Well, how is that? Well, you execute and fulfillment of the order in order for them to be able to realize a shipment that the customer then enjoys our product. So you're part of this string. And that's why I call this the visionary brand. Is may have great product, but if you can't fulfill orders, you're not a visionary brand. So you're now disrupting your community, that voice then becomes amplified, not because you have bad product, it's because you couldn't fulfill an order. So when you look at owning the customer of this community, it's number one, I say, is be authentic. Number two is be consistent and be consistently great. And if you're a premium brand, and that's predominantly what I talk about in the book, are these premium brands, because everybody's following this good, better, best level. And everybody wants to be a premium brand, but you're either a commodity or a brand. And you can't just say you're a brand without earning the loyalty of your community. So that goes beyond product. And that's why I mentioned that Ralph Lauren quote, is because that's how you create that loyalty with your community, and you become a generational brand by lifetime customer value. That's what you talk about, right? Is if you're just a commodity, your only competitive weapon is your price. But a lifestyle brand has a competitive weapon that they can control with their community. They just have to be consistent at it, and they have to be authentic with it.
And I think that authenticity has always been at the forefront, you know, and it's overused in some respects, but I call it your essence, your frequency of your skills, your knowledge, your capability, or desire. But it's interesting because I find that consistency has always been my superpower, but it's never been valued as much as it is today because of the amount of noise and the low barrier of entry in order to facilitate starting a brand comparatively to, you know, I'm old, so 10, 20, 30, and even 40 years ago. And so consistency becomes the horsepower behind the visionary opportunities and capabilities that we have. And I think it's a must read for any entrepreneur, any innovator, any entrepreneur. You know, both your podcast, the Visionary Chronicles, where we discuss things like this, or just reading the book, The Visionary Brand, and understanding that formula that you've created through all the years of dummy tax and exposure and awareness that you've been able to aggregate and coalesce into helping a ton of different entrepreneurs from San Diego to UCI to UCLA. All of Southern California has benefited from Bryan's expertise and his knowledge, and now the whole world can with his book, The Visionary Brand. Check out Bryan Smeltzer, bryansmeltzer.com. Buy his book. You will not regret it. Talk about a strong ROI. If you understand the visionary brand, whether you're a parent, a business, a service solution, or a personal brand, you will benefit exponentially. Thanks for joining the mics and me, the other Smeltzer, Bryan Smeltzer. Come back again. I got other shows. We need more of you, man. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Great interview. Take care.